what we preach here at Faithful and True all the time is, if you look at some of those A's, today we know that the way to reprogram the brain, to rewire the brain, is to find things that are healthy, that are also affordable, accessible, not necessarily anonymous, but we want to look at least a couple of those A's and say, what's affordable and accessible out there that you can use that are healthy connections, healthy community, healthy relationship, and you're going to teach the brain that there are different solutions to those emotional states that you've been medicating for all these years. There is a lot of hope, but it does take practice, it does take discipline, and it does take time.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we're going to feature a legacy podcast featuring Dr. Mark Laaser and myself. The title of this podcast is The 4 A's of Addiction. Mark and I will delve into the details of how sex addiction develops over time. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and the Faithful and True podcast.
We are going, Randy, to talk today about a continuation of our show from a couple of weeks ago about why.
Mark, that particular show really created some feedback for us that we were very encouraged by, because that question alone is probably the most frequently asked question.
That's right. So just to review for 1 minute, in that show, we talked about the fact that part of the why for many of the men that come to us is associations that are created in their brain early on between, where they're at emotionally in terms of loneliness or stress or boredom or whatever's going on in their world at a time in their life when some sexual experience, whether it be just learning how to masturbate, look at pornography for the first time, have some sexual encounter with even kids in the neighborhood. Those associations create what is perceived to be by the brain a relief from the emotional state that's painful or troubling, and the brain remembers those associations, kind of locks them in, and the why question really starts when the formula gets created in the brain that sex is equal to love, or sex is equal to nurture, or
comfort,
kindness, soothing, those kinds of things. So we talked about a lot of that on that show. Over the last couple of weeks, people have been asking me, well, that kind of explains the early solution to the question of why. How does this get kind of locked in over a lifetime? How does it develop over time, really? And I thought today it would be probably good to talk about what has been called in our field originally the 3 A's of sexual addiction, and I've added a fourth, and so today I'd like to talk about the 4 A's of how sexual addiction really develops over time.
Okay, that sounds like a great place to start.
Well, let's start by first giving credit where credit is due. This whole concept of the original 3 A's came from a colleague of ours in the field of sexual addiction who was a psychologist out in California, a man by the name of Al Cooper, Dr. Al Cooper. Dr. Cooper was one of the early pioneers in understanding the tremendous power of the Internet, and began exploring internet addiction particularly as it pertained to sexual addiction, and really wrote very brilliantly about why the internet was so powerful. And one of the things he described was the 3 A's as being, the power of the internet. So we're going to go over those here in just a second. Unfortunately, Dr. Cooper died a number of years ago, and we don't have his brilliant mind yet with us. I think part of his death might have been due to, the massive amounts of depression, really, that gets created when you study a dynamic like internet addiction, sexual addiction, and, not just any sexual addiction on the internet, but some of the more bizarre forms of it, and that can get rather depressing when you really specifically get into some of the things that are so prevalently available out there. So, but I want to give credit to Al. He was a good guy and really brilliant mind, and this original theory of the A's started back with him.
And what year are you talking about? Because as the internet has come about in the relatively short term here, as far as us looking back in the development of that technology. What year were the 3 A's reported?
Well, it was in the late 90s.
Oh, okay.
You're right, Randy. I mean, the internet was available primarily through governmental agencies, library connections to research databases early on. There were sharing groups early on. That was an early form of the internet that preceded the 1995 explosion of email and AOL and stuff like that.
Al Gore's early years?
Al Gore's early years, evidently, yeah. But the internet existed for a long time. It was just not accessible to the average person. You had to work for the government. You had to go to a library. I remember back even when I was in graduate school in the 70s, going to the library to do some research on my dissertation topic, and it was only the librarians that were able to access the databases that were available back then over the computer. That obviously changed in 1995 when a number of people figured out how to make it more affordable and available. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so let's start with the 4 A's, and the one that I've added to Al's original list is probably a good place to start, because the one that I add is accidental. So A is for accidental, meaning that so many of the men accidentally get started with sexuality. I've heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories of men that accidentally discovered pornography someplace. Some of the older men, they found the number one source historically has been, my father's stash of stuff. It was under the bed, in the closet, in the garage, in the basement, in the truck, in the attic. That's another place. And it's like, young boys explore the house, and they're always interested in secrets and, what's hidden. And, that's just, the way
the inquisitive nature of young kids.
And by the way, I think we should, say that some young girls find this stuff too. It's not just the young boys. Anytime we're inquisitive and exploratory and, want to have some fun and we're bored and we're go looking around the house, some guys are going to stumble across it. And so early exposure to pornography could be accidental. You go over to a friend's house and the friend has discovered his dad's stuff, so the friend now shows it to you. That's not as accidental, but it was not intentional. So there's a part of the A of accidental that is about the fact that it's not intentionally sought originally.
Sure.
There are other kinds of accidental experiences. You go over to the kid down the street's house, and he shows you a game, show me yours, I'll show you mine. That's one of the oldest games in the world. They have young girls in the neighborhood who want to participate in practice playing doctor or whatever else it is. It's not something that you think up on your own. It's unintentional in that sense. It's accidentally discovered, and I think that's true for a lot of guys when it comes to how they discover masturbation. It can be accidental. Most commonly it might just happen one night, and you figure out eventually how to duplicate that. We've had 100 or more guys that have talked about climbing the rope in gym class, and that produced enough stimulation to create an embarrassing moment. We have one of the guys in our focus group, the Tuesday night group, that his dad wanted him to start mowing the lawn, and he was a little young for that, so he needed to use his entire body, including his hips, to push the lawnmower. Well, the vibration of the lawnmower created, the arousal. So, whether it's discovering pornography, some other sexual encounter, even as a kid, oftentimes it's accidentally produced, and that then leads to that huge rush of adrenaline and dopamine that gets pretty locked and loaded in the brain.
Sure.
The next A that we could talk about then is, I think what begins to cement that in is accessibility. So if your dad does have a stash and you do now know where it is, it's accessible. So you don't have to go out to the store. You don't have to embarrass yourself. You don't have to pay for it. Maybe it's at your friend's house. Maybe you one guy the other day talked about finding it in the ditch. Well, there's a lot of sex addicts who get frustrated with themselves and are looking at pornography in their car, and they get despairing, so they throw it out the window. It winds up in the ditch, and I can't tell you the multiple times I've heard about guys discovering it having been thrown away. And it, there are those dumpster divers out there in the world too that have looked through dumpsters and found it there. So at some point, the next day being, it's accessible. We know where it is. We know how to find it. One of the reasons that Al talked about this in terms of the internet is that the internet has become so accessible. It's available every place. It's available over your phones, your certainly your laptops, obviously your tablet type computers. There's very few places now. Most of us have hotspots on our phones. So the other day, Debbie and I were driving down to Iowa to see the grandkids, and we had the internet the whole way because we have a hotspot on our phone. So, I was in Africa, and while it was hard pressed to find a Diet Coke or a McDonald's, there were 200 internet cafes. So one of the things that contributes to the development of the why question, or how sexual addiction gets going, is that the addict has found some, easily identifiable accessibility to pornography or whatever the sexual experience is.
I think that the development and invention of the digital devices like the iPhone has really made it's like your mobile access to pornography if you so choose.
Yeah, I think how often times has it been the case in history where something has been invented that has a very positive value? I think about the fact that there is the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, the inventor of dynamite, Nobel from Sweden, intended it for construction purposes and, demolition purposes, and became so shocked in terms of how quickly it became used for
destruction, negative manner
and warfare. He created, the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, that's oftentimes been the case with great inventions. And the internet is certainly, how many of us, particularly that are involved in whatever field we are, and certainly writing, like in our case, we use the internet to research things and so forth. Even as Christians, we use the internet now to access biblical research and biblical study. So we're not talking about things that are inherently evil here. We're just talking about the fact that given their accessibility, we know that the pornographers and the sex industry out there is going to use any and all technology available. Well, before we get into A number 3, let's just say that part of what we're talking about here is the why question. How does sexual addiction develop over time, and how does it get created in the brain? How does it get locked and loaded in the brain? So we know, again, that it starts perhaps accidentally. It starts by some innocent exposure to something. Then from that point on, whatever is the sexual activity is going to have to be accessible. It's going to have to be available to the addict in order for it to get reinforced over time. The next thing that, the next A that we need to talk about is that it's anonymous, meaning that you don't have to tell anybody. You're doing it in privacy. So, one of my chuckles about this when I was thinking about it is that so many men have said they discovered their dad's stash. It was stacked up someplace. And they would look at the magazines, and then they would carefully put it back.
Recreate the situation that they found it in.
Right. They didn't want their dad to know that they had been looking at it. So they put it in the same order, they put it in the same place, and all of that kind of thing. All of the men that I work with would say that when they were growing up, no one was talking to them about sexuality. I can't tell you the number of times, I always quote these huge numbers, hundreds and hundreds of men who have told me that at some point it became clear to them that either their mother and or their father was aware of what they were doing, masturbating, looking at pornography or whatever. The mother walks into the bedroom while the son is masturbating, and nothing is ever said. It remains anonymous. So one of the things that reinforces this sexual addiction pattern is that no one is talking about it, and whatever it is you're doing allows you to do it in relative secrecy. So the great thing about the internet in terms of this anonymity, is that you think in the privacy of your own home or the privacy of your own office, you're accessing this stuff and no one knows. Well, the truth of it is, particularly if you're looking at illegal stuff, the FBI and other governmental agencies are tracking some of this stuff. I'm not wanting to scare everybody this morning, but I am saying that, going back to your childhood and youth and all of this, it is the perception, I think, of safety and the perception of anonymity that allows you to continue the behavior. And the continuation of the behavior is part of the why question. It is how you are finding ongoing relief from whatever's going on for you emotionally in the sexual activity that you don't have to talk to anybody about. So you're learning a couple things. You're learning that the sexual activity, the sexual arousal, the orgasm is producing actually a neurochemical relief for you from whatever it is you're going through. And then you're also learning at the same time that you don't have to talk about those feelings, or you don't have to talk about anything that's going on for you. So you're learning a kind of a dual message, which also gets locked into the brain, and that's part of one of the core beliefs of sex addiction. And all of this anonymity part really creates the ongoing secrecy of what we're doing, and it creates this core belief that sex addicts have that no one is taking care of them but themselves. No one is taking care of me but me. Oftentimes when I hear these situations, like, for example, a parent discovers that the son is masturbating or he's looking at pornography, and they feel so uncomfortable with this that they don't choose to talk about it. So the kid grows up thinking that, this is the way that I take care of myself, and doesn't really have any messages to the contrary about how it might not be healthy. But more than that, it's probably a reflection of a larger pattern that the parents aren't helping a child talk about their feelings at all in a healthy way. So the anonymity part is something that reinforces secrecy, the inability to talk about the emotions and feelings that are behind this, and all of this is part of the why question in terms of how the sexual addiction behavior and pattern developed. So what I'd like some of the wives out there this morning to hear is that, your husband who's never shared with you about his secret sexual life, this is a pattern that he's learned since childhood. He's learned how to keep it anonymous, keep it secret, not talk to anybody, not feel safe to talk to anybody about it. It's really not about you. It's about him and the development of his life, his emotional development, and the development of the addiction as being, the source of the solution to his loneliness.
And in his adult years, as he's experiencing this stress and loneliness, he reverts back to those times in which that activity provided him with relief and comfort and
nurture and all of those things. One of the things that I think is interesting, one of the guys was talking about this last night. We were talking about the 4As in one of our groups last night. And he was saying, I think most of the time that I was involved in my addiction, I wasn't aware at all of how lonely I was. My wife now is talking to me about, why didn't you share with me how lonely you were, or, what some of the reasons for that loneliness was. And he said, I really didn't know. I really didn't understand it. When you go back and you begin to understand that the sexual things have become a relief for the loneliness at a very early age, you begin to see that the men learned early on how to medicate their loneliness. So back at age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, no one was talking to them about feelings. No one was helping them practice talking about feelings. So they weren't really aware of the language of feelings. So they were feeling lonely, but they didn't necessarily know how to articulate that. And what was going on instead, they were learning a neurochemical a solution to whatever the feeling state was. They knew somehow, somewhere inside themselves, they didn't feel good. They knew that when they looked at pornography, masturbated, did other sexual things, that made them feel good. So what they learned is, this is my friend. And so now when they start getting in to sobriety and sexual purity, some of this feeling state is going to start coming up. That's when they need to learn how to practice it. And I just want to take a moment and say to the wives that might be listening, this is not about you and your availability, your safety, or whatever it is. It's just about an ongoing pattern that's been reinforced, virtually for some of the guys daily over the course of 10, 20, 30 or more years. So the anonymity is kind of part of what's built in. That A is built into the development of addiction.
Okay. So
now we need to go on to the final one, and that's the A of affordability. So many guys tell me, if they found pornography early on, they found it. So, they didn't have to pay for it. I can't tell you the number of guys who say to me with great pride, I never paid for pornography. I always found it. I always discovered it. It was my dad's stuff. Well, we certainly also know that, masturbation doesn't cost anything. So, partly what creates and develops an addiction pattern is what is in fact free. What is in fact something that is affordable. They don't have to pay for. Well, in the last number of years, the internet has certainly come along, and a lot of the stuff that's available on the internet, you don't have to pay for. Most of the even worst pornographic websites have freebies on them. They have free introduction to, our site, free video, free pictures, free this, and before you know it, they've got you kind of locked in. And their hope, of course, is that you'll get so entrenched in their site that you will want to then buy a membership. But the truth of it is there are millions of sites, so you can stay on the internet getting all kinds of free stuff all day long. So the fourth A is simply recognition that for a lot of the guys, they're very proud of the fact, maybe very frugal, that they haven't really spent any money on this. But there's so much free stuff that goes probably back, even into their childhood. And the free stuff is very dangerous. You think, it can't be that bad. I don't have to pay for it. But the truth of it is it's part of the ongoing development of the brain connections that will always remind you somewhere down deep in the memory banks of your brain that sex is the solution to an emotional state that I'm not comfortable with. So those A's, when they're working in combination, Randy, are really part of the why question. It's like, how does sex addiction become my best friend, the number one solution that I have? It's because of the accidental nature of how it first happened. It's how, it was accessible, anonymous, and affordable throughout the life. And I would particularly like all those partners out there to know that we're talking about patterns that develop so much earlier than he met you. So, these are old, conditioned, neurologically wired problems in the brain. We know that there's good news because we can rewire the brain, but the addiction, in terms of the why question, really rarely involves things that you have done.
Right. So as we wrap up today's program, summarizing those four A's, is there a final thought that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Well, yeah, I think what we preach here at Faithful and True all the time is if you look at some of those A's today, we know that the way to reprogram the brain, to rewire the brain, is to find things that are healthy, that are also affordable, accessible, not necessarily anonymous, but we want to look at least a couple of those A's and say, what's affordable and accessible out there that you can use that are healthy connections, healthy community, healthy relationship, and you're going to teach the brain that there are different solutions to those emotional states that you've been medicating for all these years. There is a lot of hope, but it does take practice, it does take discipline, and it does take time.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed this opportunity to listen to the wisdom of Dr. Mark Laaser, and hope that today's conversation was beneficial for you. If it has helped you open your eyes to struggles that you're currently going through, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources that will be helpful to you, as well as over 500 podcasts like this one. We hope that today's message has been impactful, and if it has opened your eyes, we invite you to look into attending one of our Men's Journey workshops, which we offer every month here at Faithful and True. Click on the workshops on our website page, and you'll find all the details and online registration that we have to offer you to come and attend our men's workshop. We also have the information and online registration for the women's workshop, as well as information about our 2 couples workshops that you'll need to call our office to get more detail and to register for the couples workshops. In the meantime, we hope that this week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.